If you're a ChatGPT Plus subscriber, then you might already be familiar with using plugins with that AI tool. But what Microsoft announced at its Build conference this morning was that plugins are going to be coming to Copilot. And not just Microsoft 365 Copilot, but Copilots and its AI tools generally. So whether you're working in your Microsoft 365 apps, or you're using Bing Chat, or you're using the Edge browser, or you're using anything that seems to connect with these AI experiences for Microsoft, you should be able to bring in the plugin capabilities that they're going to surface, which are going to be very similar and interoperable with the plugin capabilities that are currently available in ChatGPT. And I think this is a very big announcement because, as I've focused on before in other videos like this one here, one of the concerns that I've had about Microsoft 365 Copilot and the other Copilot technologies is that the efficacy of these technologies in the way they've described is obviously going to be linked to the data that they can gain access to. And so much has been said about leveraging Microsoft Search and the Microsoft Graph to provide grounding to these tools that I've had concerns about how are they going to interrelate to third-party apps. So many of the businesses that I work with and so many businesses out there aren't 100% on Microsoft 365 or Microsoft's technologies, and even if they're heavily invested in using Microsoft 365 for most of what they do, they might use another app like a different CRM, or they might use a different finance package that is outside of Microsoft 365. And without that context of the data that lives in that system for Copilot might be very limited in giving them responses that are going to be entirely relevant to their business. I've focused previously on the tools that Microsoft has to extend the index that lives within the Microsoft Graph through tools like graph connectors, and how they can be deployed to get you data from other platforms like Salesforce, for example, so that you would be able to use Microsoft Search to gain insights from your Salesforce information. But I've also highlighted that these aren't really tools or solutions that are built for smaller businesses. They're more on the enterprise end of things, and this was backed up by the announcement a couple of weeks ago about semantic indexing, which was connected to Copilot, which was going to be included in E3 and E5 licenses, but there was no mention there of business standard or business premium. So with today's announcement, we've not only learned that plugins are coming along, but we've also learned a bit more about how Microsoft 365 Copilot and Microsoft's other Copilots are going to process your prompt, which may alleviate some of the concerns that I've previously expressed about accessing your third-party data. However, let's first talk about the plugins themselves. So the plugins seem to be built on a similar model to the connectors that we already see in platforms like Power Automate. And so if you're familiar with using Power Automate, you'll know that there are lots and lots of connectors there. I think there are now more than 1,000. And even if you don't have a connector for the piece of software that you want to use, so long as that software has a modern API, then you're able to build a custom connector in order to access information in there. Now, accessing that information is often fairly transactional in that you have a record that you want to pull down from your third-party system, or you have data that you want to push into it. It isn't kind of the general experience that you might see all the time if you're just searching in the search bar in OneDrive or in your Microsoft 365 apps. So the example that was highlighted by Microsoft was a transactional example using Jira to create a ticket from a chat with Copilot in Teams in Jira using some information that you would be able to get through the dialogue that you were having with Copilot. And I think this is a really sensible approach to what a plugin might do for you, as these are the types of things where if you're the person who's using these systems every day, then you're probably fairly quick at it. But if you work in an environment where there's a lot of different systems and you occasionally need to go in and get some information or put some information in there, being able to do that with natural language from Teams or elsewhere in Microsoft 365 makes a great deal of sense. But to me, the more interesting thing was learning a little bit more about the Copilot stack and how requests to Copilot, whether that's Microsoft 365 Copilot, Microsoft's other Copilots, or Copilots that are even built by third parties, how those are then orchestrated to get back to the response that you need. What was talked about was a concept called retrieval augmented generation. And you can see an example of this most simply today by using Bing Chat. If you go to Bing Chat and you put in a request there, if there isn't an immediate answer to whatever it is that you've asked for, then Bing Chat is going to go out and search the internet using Bing in order to get some additional information that is going to ground your request or improve your prompt. And essentially what Bing is doing before it sends a request over to the large language model or foundational model, as they are now being called, is adding some context so that you're getting a better response. And we know from previous announcements describing the Copilot system that this is what Microsoft 365 Copilot is going to be doing within your Microsoft 365 tenant with your business data. That it's going to be taking a prompt, whether that's a prompt that's generated by you typing something or you make it a request like create a document out of these documents. It's going to retrieve the information that's relevant to your request. It's going to take that information and send that over to the model so that you can get a response to it. And all of that grounding information, the way that we'd understood that before, was coming from the Microsoft Graph. But now we know better. We know that you're going to be able to use web APIs directly, or you're going to be able to use other plugins to provide grounding information to your requests to Copilot. And this is really exciting because what it means conceptually is at the point that that request is being processed, you aren't limited to enriching that request with just data that exists in your Microsoft 365 tenant. Copilot can choose to go out using the plugins that exist or using APIs that you've given it access to, and it can gain information from other systems that aren't inside of Microsoft 365. So based on this description, it seems likely that a company like Intuit, for example, will be able to create a connector or a plugin, however you want to describe it, that works with Copilot to give that initial grounding exercise access into your QuickBooks information, so that what you're sending over to the foundational model has the same information for your request, whether you choose to house your invoices in Business Central or whether you choose to house them in QuickBooks. And for lots and lots of businesses, that's going to be very important. Now, I think it's very likely that there will be some benefits that are conveyed by having your information indexed by Graph versus using these other techniques. It may be that Graph is quicker, it can provide more information, you're more limited over the amount of transactions you can do with a particular API, for example. But at least it's possible to make these types of connections, and Microsoft isn't in creating Copilots, creating a walled garden that isn't going to play as nicely with third-party apps as has been the case throughout the history of their technologies. Microsoft has really been a company that has been focused on its partners and have been focused on playing well with third parties, certainly over the last decade or two. And I think what that means is that a lot of businesses, and in many cases particularly smaller businesses, are very comfortable using Microsoft 365 for some of what they do, but maybe don't rely on more enterprise-centric solutions like Dynamics 365 for other bits of their operation that could be covered by more small business-focused solutions like HubSpot, for example. I think what we've learned today is that Copilot could really work with anything, and I'm very excited to see how that's going to work out. I'm going to go and play with some of the plugins that I have access to in ChatGPT, because we know that we're going to get similar functionality with Copilot in the future, and I'm certainly all the more excited to play with Microsoft 365 Copilot when we get access to that at some point in the future. I hope this has been a useful analysis for you and dug into some of the issues that have been of interest from my previous videos. Do leave your comments down below as to what you think about this announcement. Are you still very excited about this? Do you still have concerns? How do you feel about what Microsoft has announced today? And I will certainly continue to update on this topic as new news and new announcements come out. But until then, until the next video, thanks for watching and bye bye.